I always have this wonderful thought about whoever wrote that Genesis.
Yes.
There was no school of geometry,
Right.
and I presume he's out somewhere in the wilderness. And close by are the Egyptians worshiping the sun.
Yes.
The sun was their god.
Right.
And somehow this phenomenal individual, inspired obviously by God, wrote a story of our beginnings that did begin in light. Now we actually understand what had to happen to that light to make this physical world, but it was the derivative, it was the initiating product.
Well, hello, Bible lovers, and welcome to Unscrolled, Museum of the Bible's podcast that is an attempt for us to convey the impossible, and that's the kaleidoscopic power of the Bible. Well, today I have incredible blessing to welcome Dr. Bill West. Dr. West is the emeritus founder, actually, of West Cancer Institute and Research Institute in Memphis, Tennessee, and he's written a rather interesting book called Sacred Science. Dr. West, welcome.
Thank you.
Matter of fact, Dr. West, I will say that I'm old enough to remember that phrase, sacred science, would be seen almost as an oxymoron. I don't know if that's true any longer, maybe more true today. I'm not sure. But, this dividing line, unfortunately, Dr. West, you know it better than I do, that has in some ways impeded people of faith to look at science the same way. As a matter of fact, I'll share a quick anecdote with you to get your impression. I was visiting with a high school class of Christian students, very high-performing Christian students, and I had them all close their eyes because I wanted to ask them this question. Is this true or false? That scientists believe that our moon was formed when the Earth was struck by a giant object sometime in the past. Raise your hand if you think that's true. Don't raise it if you think it's false. Of course, I had them shut their eyes so that they wouldn't be peer pressured, right? Well, very few of them raised their hands, and afterwards we talked about it, and I said, actually this is what most scientists believe is true. And the class president, senior class president said, well, Dr. Campo, if scientists believe that's true, then we know it must be false.
My goodness.
I know, it was rather shocking to me.
That's shocking.
But of course, in some ways it illustrated this idea that people of faith are looking askance at science, and people of science very often are looking askance at people of faith. You bridge those worlds, so we look to you to help us understand this a bit. Why do you feel science is sacred?
Well, 60% of scientists are actually believers. They're afraid to say they are. There's a general mantra in the field, don't give God a foot in the door. The purpose of that, although it sounds cynical, the purpose is let's don't go to God too quickly as a solution to this problem. The concern would be, whatever you're studying, if you decided, well, God did this, then we might not really understand the full nature of how he created something, the glory of how he created something, all the missing pieces and parts. So I understand it in a way. There's actually certain truth and goodness to it. But as a general rule, scientists don't talk about their faith, and I think that's too bad.
I agree. One of the things that's extraordinary about your work, it almost seems unfair, I will tell you, is that you're a medical doctor, trained in this fashion. And then when I read your text, it's quite clear that your interests not only go everywhere, but your depth of understanding. I mean, I would have thought in some ways you might have been a mathematician or trained in that fashion, or someone trained in physics. So help our audience understand a little bit more why a doctor, for all intents and purposes, has this wide and deep understanding, and why such an interest in these areas?
Well, of course, God is the great mathematician.
Yes, he is.
And everything that's been created is expressed in mathematics.
I have to stop you there because I think I've heard you say that before. Yeah. But to the layperson, that's quite a statement. So this idea, and I've heard it from others, but it really is rather striking. dig into that and break that down a little bit for us. When you say that the Creator is the great mathematician, that in a way the expression of equations becomes creation, it's a beautiful thought, but we need you to speak to us at a level that many of us might not understand.
Well, what I have not said is how he breathes fire into those equations
Okay.
and makes them happen. That's a famous quote
Yes.
from, I think, Stephen Hawking. But it goes back to the time of Plato. And Plato's concept, which remarkably I think was spot on, is there's a higher dimension of ideal forms.
Yes.
My favorite example of that is something that's called the Higgs field. I'm not sure how many of our listeners would have heard of the Higgs field, but it makes us physical. If we were just light, light has no mass. Light circles the Earth 7 times a second.
Right.
And you can't make anything physical out of light, as wonderful as it is. It's energy. Now we know that energy is equivalent to matter
Now that sounds familiar.
times c squared
Okay.
equals mc squared.
Right.
So the question becomes, well, then how does light become physicality? And to me, the most wonderful example of that, and Peter Higgs looked at an equation, and he said, we don't know about the missing mass. Where did it come from? If this equation existed, it would explain the missing mass. It implied something called a Higgs boson.
Yes.
And that was in, I think,
61.
the 80s he proposed it, could have been in the 60s. It was confirmed by the CERN accelerator in Europe, I think in 12.
Yes, very recently.
Recently. So these are really very recent findings
Yes.
compared to the hundreds of years of great mathematicians wondering and seeking. And that's why I think today we are so blessed to have this more complete understanding of the creation. And it does come back to math. I don't like to use the math because I'm not a mathematician. So I prefer, for instance, it takes 10 equations to describe space-time. So I prefer to use the word blueprint. And I just say space-time is a blueprint. And there were 8 blueprints in the Big Bang required to build this universe. And that was one of the most fun experiences I've had. I've read a lot of science. Science is my life. I'm a cancer doctor. That requires reading a lot of journals, understanding a lot of science.
Yes.
But
Reading dense material.
dense material. And never have I had more fun than it began when I heard the most rapidly increasing denomination of faith is none.
Right.
N-O-N-E.
The nuns, as they're
The
called.
nuns.
Yes.
And you ask a nun, well, then what's your basis? And they would say, science. So then the thought came to me, well, what are they saying in science?
Yes.
And that's why I spent, gosh, I guess the better part of several years trying to understand what you would see in science as a foundation. And it became pretty clear to me that there were these 8 blueprints, each independent. I consider them each a work of art. I consider each one of them a work of God. And they together put together the requirements to create this universe. Life, of course, goes on to need DNA, and that's another whole special topic.
Sure.
We have no idea where DNA came from. Actually, I'll finish that anecdote.
Please.
Watson and Crick won the Nobel Prize for DNA.
Sure.
And as Crick was near death, he declared it could not have arisen on planet Earth. It must have been flown in from outer space.
Right.
So we... Yeah.
There you go. And when you can't explain something, almost anything will do.
That's right.
But we're at the Museum of the Bible. And as you know, our book opens with that striking line, in the beginning,
Yes.
God created the heaven and the earth.
And he said,
Let there
be light.
And isn't that fascinating? I've heard many philosophers and theologians and others talk about this whole idea that so many people worship the sun. The idea being that the sun, in many ways, was the starter of all things. And here, at least in this account of creation, there was certainly, if there was no light, there was no sun.
Yes.
But take us back to that moment, because for so many people of faith, and not just people of faith, anyone, it's this idea of, why am I here? Who am I? Where did I come from? These are the big questions. You've never heard these before,
Well,
Dr. West.
I always have this wonderful thought about whoever wrote that Genesis.
Yes.
There was no school of geometry,
Right.
and I presume he's out somewhere in the wilderness. And close by are the Egyptians worshiping the sun.
Yes.
The sun was their god.
Right.
And somehow this phenomenal individual, inspired obviously by God, wrote a story of our beginnings that did begin in light. Now we actually understand what had to happen to that light to make this physical world, but it was the derivative, it was the initiating product.
One of the things that's puzzling to many of our listeners is when you hear a scientist describe what is called the Big Bang, right? And they say that all mass at the start, right, was infinitesimally small and infinitesimally dense. And so when you think about those words, I'm an English guy, so I can deal with the language. And so this tiny thing that started all things, when we talk about size, because we think in these spatial ways. So Dr. West, help us understand, take us back to that moment, if it was 13 billion years ago or so.
Well, language may fail me, but that universe created, I'm going to say, and embarrassingly block the term, but it leapt out of this primordial dot that has a more scientific term, by the way, that I'm blocking.
That's fine.
But we know that that's the case because today our universe is still expanding.
Right.
So we can actually rerun the movie back to the moment when it was that tiny,
We can't get quite to that very first moment,
Right.
but just after that.
Real
right?
close. Real
Just
close.
after that.
And
so
and
when
I
you
will
say,
say
yes.
there's a lot of other good evidence for that fact because for the first 20 minutes, that newly created universe was so hot, it was a thermonuclear reactor.
Right.
And it could therefore make hydrogen and lithium. And that's precisely the quantum of hydrogen and lithium we have today, that which would have been created 20 minutes by that Big Bang. So we have a lot of evidence. There's really no reason to doubt the Big Bang. Quite to the contrary.
Well, in your book, you describe some of this, of course, and from not just your book, but other sources, it's really those opening minutes, even seconds, that are really so extraordinary.
Yes.
And one of the things you point out is how fine-tuned all of it was, and to have been off even in the tiniest amount, we'd never have what we have today.
Correct.
Help our listeners understand that a bit more specifically.
Well, we, for instance, are made of atoms.
Right.
One of the more difficult terms I find is the term quark, Q-U-A-R-K,
Yes.
which I regret because the light of that Big Bang collided the photons and created quarks. And the quarks came in up and down flavors. And an up quark was 2/3 positive, and a down quark was 1/3 negative, compared to the electron, which is -1 negative. And so if we combine two up quarks, 2/3 each, 4/3, with one down, 1/3 negative, we get a 3/3. We get a proton. If we do the opposite, 1 2/3 up, two of the -1/3, we get a neutron. So I just look at that and I think, who was the clever mathematician that thought of that? And that's supposed to be just an accident. So that's just from the very beginning. And of course, the quarks go on to build atoms, and atoms build molecules, and the protons fuel, and change to deuterium and tritium, fuel the stars. They create the table of the elements. The stars explode, fertilize the heavens, and here we are on this beautiful planet Earth.
And when you talk about this planet, you talk about the conditions for life that we are in, but you're not of a mind that we're the only place that may have those conditions. I mean, you say this is a really special place, but you also point out what I hear people call the Goldilocks kind of atmosphere, right? Where we are in this place that allows for life to occur, but if you look out into the near infinity of space, could there be another planet where life could be taking place? And I know we're really out there in speculation now, but what are your thoughts about that?
I'll probably disappoint you by saying I'm skeptical.
Of life being anywhere else in the entire
I
universe
think
except for
we're
here.
God's garden,
God's chosen little dot of
chosen
this
little
earth.
dot. Now,
Doesn't disappoint me.
I could be proven wrong very easily.
Yeah,
but,
I guess we could be.
They certainly haven't gotten in touch.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not
right.
yet. If they're out there,
If they're
we're
out
waiting to hear.
That's right.
We're actually sending out orbits.
Yes.
We had some wonderful rocket ships this week that sent orbits to Mars. So maybe we'll see if there's any evidence of life on Mars.
Well, I think even in our brief comments so far, we've laid out the fact that we truly are at the nascent stage of really understanding so many of these things. And I think that's one of the things that's so exciting about your research, about this book, is you're really taking the next step in helping to bridge that gap. But help our listeners understand, why is it that, maybe even pointing out, what would you say is the biggest misunderstanding that Christians have about the nature of science that leads them to be skeptical in some ways?
Well, they have this idea there's conflict. And I must put that right at the foot of Charles Darwin. There was no conflict. Actually, all of the wonderful, and I'm going to not list them, but scientists, mathematicians before Darwin felt like they were reading the thoughts of God. And then Darwin came along and made it all an accident. And you know, I spent a lot of time thinking about Darwin. I feel that he was really wrong. I don't think he really understood what he was talking about, but we talked about the Higgs equation. I believe it lives in a higher dimension. I think if there's a mathematical landscape, that implies there's also a higher landscape of genes and proteins.
Interesting.
So I believe the way God has the system designed is that our genome, most of which we call junk, DNA, is the nursery. And that DNA can take downloads, in the modern lingo, from this library of life. And I think, I'm trying to remember the bird that makes that, the lungfish, was the first creature to come on land. And you can watch these genes be added as this fish begins to develop the ability to breathe and then to take the first step on land. So I think it's all from God's libraries, and that he leaves enough free will so that there's surprises along the way, but he knows what's going to happen. Life is going to conquer land. Life is going to fly in the skies. And and someday there will be a creature created in his image.
Yes, and here we are.
Here we are.
And so many of our listeners are thinking, my goodness, this doctor has such a deep understanding of science. He loves God. What was your background in training? Because so often we see these as disparate or...
Well, you know, I lost my mother to breast cancer when I was 22.
Sorry.
And of course, she was my inspiration. She would hold my hand when I was 3 years old and make me listen to the sermon. But
what church were you in?
Methodist.
Methodist church.
Yes.
Okay.
And her favorite book was Portraits of Christ in Genesis. Are you familiar with that?
I don't think I know it, no.
It makes the thesis that every component of Genesis is a prototype of Jesus. The ark with Jesus. Climb on board and you'll be safe.
I can see that.
I won't give other examples, but it was that point by a great theologian, actually, Dr. DeHaan. And that book sits proudly on my bookshelf, and that really moved her. And therefore, I was infected at an early age, which I might say, if I were to talk to parents,
yes,
that's important. Expose your children.
Yes.
Get them started early, wondering where they came from and so forth.
And hand a Bible to them so they can see at least this perspective of how God's Word can be washed into their hearts and lives.
And there you are.
And so you grew up in this Christian home, and then you suffered this tragic loss of your mother.
I did.
And did that drive you to be a cancer researcher and then to follow it as you saw it sap life from your own mother?
My father was a surgeon, and of course surgeons thought they could cure everything with a knife.
Cut it out.
And to give you, it's a difficult example, but My mother developed a recurrence in the lung, and the treatment they chose at the time was to remove the lung.
Oh my.
That's, I think even today, anybody, even a non-doctor, could see that was not a very kind thing to do.
Right.
Of course, they didn't have any alternatives. Today, we do have much more meaningful medical therapy, and today she would receive immunotherapy, a variety of different drugs, and I think she would have lived a much, much longer, happier life. So we've made progress treating cancer.
Wonderful. Well, I asked you the question about what Christian people might misunderstand about science. Well, let me ask the flip question. What about scientists? What do they fail to understand about the Christian faith or about the Bible?
I think too many of them write it off as old wives' tales. I don't think they've ever really encountered Jesus. I don't think they've really taken that walk.
Right.
And therefore they haven't opened themselves to the beauty that adds to life. I'd be so sad if I didn't have Jesus in my life. I would really feel deprived. And I love the Jewish faith.
Me too.
And I'd be so deprived if I didn't have that story of the Exodus and so forth. So to me, it's an enriching foundation. And I'm sad for those scientists that think it's outdated or irrelevant.
I understand. You know, one of the things I alluded to early in our conversation is the way your training was certainly in the medical science, but your ideas, thoughts, and interests went more broadly. You know, how would you speak to a young person who's thinking about their future and their career? You know, it takes so many years of study to become a medical doctor these days, so much.
I did.
You know, so you remember that crucible.
I was 30 years old when I received my first meaningful paycheck, so yeah.
Okay. Well, and I'm sure a lot of today's students are nodding their head in agreement. So how would you advise? You're talking to an 18-year-old, they're about to graduate from high school, they're thinking about a career. You've had now study into so many scientific fields and other kinds of things. What sort of advice would you give that young woman or young man today?
I just simply don't think you have a full understanding of the miracle of life, the gifts we've been given, if you don't consider the possibility that they actually are the gifts of a creator, that they're not accidents.
Right.
They were meant to be. And as much as I love my dogs, by the way, and why am I talking about dogs? And I adore them, but they never will be able to receive that gift. Although I hope they're pets in heaven. I really do. I really do. But we've been given that special gift to understand meaning and purpose and planning. And it would be a shame for that to be dissociated from the Creator that gave us that capability.
Agreed. If you were to say, here's the primary lesson, if there's one takeaway from my book, Sacred Science, this is it. What are you trying to convey with the book more than any other single thing?
That there is no conflict between science and faith, that fully understood, and this is the challenge, if you fully understand the science, you will realize there's no way it's accidental, there's no way it just popped out of the sky, that it's been carefully planned, again, like beautiful pieces of art, to work together to create this fabulous universe, this precious planet, and we haven't even gotten to life,
right?
You know, which was still to come.
Yes. You know, so many talk about the very thing you pointed out, and that is the extraordinary nature of mathematics, but they would say that time and chance is the only combination one needs, right? With enough time.
Let's throw in the multiverse.
Well, now wait a minute. You've introduced this new idea.
I'm just saying things that
sure.
I call these escape mechanisms.
Right. Well, it's difficult. Even an Earth that sounds old, right, at 13 billion years, one of the reasons that you know well that many people have invented a theory like the multiverse is because it's just, there's not enough time. Even with time and chance, 13 billion years doesn't seem like enough time to accomplish what has been accomplished on Earth. And you mentioned the multiverse theory. Maybe help those who haven't heard this theory understand what some scientists believe is true about our understanding of the universe.
Well, our particular universe is just so beautifully the word is tuned. Books have been written on the fine-tuning of this universe.
Yes.
If the ratio of the electron to the proton were slightly different, we're talking about minuscule differences, we wouldn't exist. So something has fixed the attributes of this universe in preparation for life, in preparation for consciousness, which, by the way, is the big mystery. Still the remaining huge mystery.
Right. Why are we conscious? Why?
And so to escape, for instance, the implication of one beautifully tuned universe, well, what if there were a multiverse, an infinite number of universes,
Yes.
and we happen to live on the one that got it right?
We perceive this one, but there are others we simply don't perceive. And isn't it interesting that that's not considered a faith statement?
Right.
Right. But here we are talking about a non-contingent being who created heaven and earth, but that's a statement of faith.
That's right.
Well, here we are. I'm preaching to the choir, but the choir is an important member of the church.
That's right.
We get that too. We talked about your remarkable interests and how they seem to go everywhere. You finished the book now. Talk to us about what's ahead for you, Dr. West.
I will not write another book.
Okay. There was another crucible there.
I suspect you've written some books.
Well, I understand it can be a painful grind in some ways, but a birthing experience in others.
It is. It was 3 years of, 5-6 hours a day. And fortunately, my sweet wife didn't object when I disappeared into the basement. And so, no, I don't. I was moved for this particular topic. I don't know another one that would move me. I'm not a professional writer. I so admire people that are. And I know you have affiliates at the Museum of the Bible that have written a variety of wonderful books.
We have. Well, you know the experience well. I think one of the things that interests me, and I think our listeners would be interested as well, you set out to write this book, and you conveyed this idea that you really did want to bridge this gap between faith and science. But because science is so remarkably complex, you really had to circumscribe it. Maybe help us understand how you chose the chapters and the topics that you would cover in such a complex topic.
Well, I did boil it down to the 8 blueprints of the universe. There are 3 sections.
That was the framework, really, for the book.
That was the first third.
Right.
And then the middle third, to me, was easier, actually, DNA, life.
Yes, DNA and life.
And then the third was more difficult, and that is consciousness. What is the relationship between the brain and mind? And still our number one mystery, in my opinion.
Understood.
Still not understood. And so that was the broad breakdown, and it actually took me more time to really get a good handle on the 8 blueprints of the universe. They're so remarkable.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I still have people say, well, I tried to read your book and it was too difficult. And of course, I cringe at that because I really, really tried, to make it readable.
Understandable to the layperson. Understood.
But then I had people that tell me how much it meant to them. They bought multiple copies and gave them to family members, and that offsets some of the pain.
Well, you'll be happy to know that before I met you or introduced to your work, a friend had read your book and said you have to have a copy of it.
Oh, wonderful!
So it's getting
that
out
makes
there.
My day.
Good. Well, good. That's always good to hear. Well, I can't let you go until we talk about the hot topic of the day, this idea of artificial intelligence and where it fits into this paradigm when we think about science, especially as this discussion of the superintelligence. I spoke to someone who runs an AI company recently, and he said, Carlos, the idea of a superintelligence already exists. According to him, he believes there are at least 20 supercomputers who, at least from his perspective, these computers have an IQ that we would maybe compare to a 300, something like that.
Wow.
They already exist. They can't be released, as it were, to the common person because they're too dangerous, right? You unleash a superintelligence like that into the world, and evil could, of course, easily follow. Your career has been so remarkable because it sounds like you're fearless to me. You're not afraid about what's next. You pursue truth. As an English professor, I would say I compare you to the Ulysses that I read in Tennyson, that his gray spirit is yearning to pursue knowledge beyond the utmost bounds of human thought, like a sinking star, as it were. That's been your career to me. You're a fearless pursuer of truth. So what about this truth, though? I'm hearing a lot of philosophers and theologians say artificial intelligence is a dangerous thread, and if we follow it too far, it's a little bit like Marlowe's Faust, right? And Faust maybe didn't understand. Maybe there are guardrails beyond which we shouldn't study. What are your thoughts about artificial intelligence? Is that a bridge too far?
I haven't thought as deeply about it as I would like to. It does seem to me to have that potential to be incredibly demeaning to the human spirit, human consciousness. So far, it seems fairly harmless. You know, you can ask a question of ChatGTP and get an answer. But I would be one who would love to see a respected international community decide what are the guardrails.
Yes.
You know, how far should we take this? What should we do? Right. And I certainly don't have the knowledge and depth to be a committee of one. But I'd like to see some serious thought given to just how far we should take artificial intelligence.
I'm with you, and I'm gratified to see that there have been a number of movements now, nationally and even internationally, that talk about the ethical use of artificial intelligence. Right. This same gentleman I spoke to you of, his impression is that it won't be long before every young person has what he has described as a super intelligent tutor. Right.
How would you know how to grade a paper?
Believe me, I was a college president 18 months ago, and so AI was just burgeoning, and our professors were having quite a time grading those papers because it was nearly impossible to track whether this was the product of artificial intelligence or not. So, well, Dr. West, thank you. Thank you so much for the book. Thank you for the spirit that you are conveying, because what the book does is it does bridge that gap between science and faith. Here at the Museum of the Bible, our mission is to invite all people to engage with the transformative power of the Bible. Yes. The fearlessness that you seem to have in your career is something that we share as well. We believe that all truth is God's truth, and that to pursue knowledge and to pursue truth is to pursue the embodiment of that truth, who is Jesus Christ.
And let me thank you for the Museum of the Bible.
Thank you.
This is my third visit.
Wonderful.
And it's probably been, I forget when it opened, but the first time was fairly soon after it opened.
2017, so it must have been right after that.
I was here for the Shroud.
Oh, wonderful.
What an experience that was.
I'm sure.
And today I'm going to be here for the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Terrific.
But it's just a wonderful gift to the world. And I'm just very appreciative this exists, and it's a wonderful statement of the truth of the ideals to which we've been speaking.
Amen. Amen. Well, Dr. West, thank you again, and thank you to our listeners. Thank you for joining us today on Unscrolled, and we look forward to another conversation very soon.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked this conversation, if you learned something new, then share it with your family and friends, or leave us a review so more people can find out about the history, narrative, and impact of the Bible. Be sure to follow us here or on your social media platform of choice. See or hear you next time on Unscrolled.